All right, hello. So I decided to do pollution and the impact it has on Black communities. All right, overview. During my presentation, we'll be going over the effects of pollution, how it harms Black communities throughout the United States. And I decided to research this because I'm passionate about the topic of pollution, because not only in my chemistry classes are learning about the effects of greenhouse gases and pollution, but it's also been a very prominent topic of discussion in our recent past. And I chose Black people because they have been discriminated against a lot in our nation's past. So I wanted to see if there was any relation. Unfortunately, there was. All right. Experience. How does pollution affect the environment? Harmful gases are emitted by these industries, and these greenhouse gases, when they're heated, they absorb and emit infrared radiation. Because Earth has an atmosphere, the infrared radiation stays in, which increases the temperature, which causes global warming. That global warming leads to land ice melting, which goes into the ocean, which contributes to sea level rise, which not only increases the temperature of the ocean which harms animals, but the level of the ocean actually goes up, which harms communities all around the world. Polar bears, melting ice happens, and coral reefs are bleached because when CO2 dissolves into the ocean, CO2 produces carbonic acid, so the pH level actually increases because the acidity's going up, which harms the sea level life. Take, for example, you have people, or you have little crabs who are trying to have build strong shells, but it's being um, melted because of the acidity in the ocean. Experience. How does pollution affect the poor and vulnerable? So we see there was one example from the house where he was born. Henry Clark could stand in his backyard and see the plumes pouring out one of the biggest oil refineries in the United States. Sometimes I find the air so foul I'd have to grab my nose and run back into the house until it cleared up. So this kid and his family can't even go outside because they can't get fresh air because of the pollution. And this just goes to show one of the statistics is like African Americans, United States are exposed to 38% more toxic fumes in the air than white people, and they're also more likely to end up living in fence lines areas by 75%. And fence lines communities are communities that are next to company, industry, or service facilities that are directly affected in some way by the facility's operation, which can be traffic, chemistry, chemical emissions. And there was one instance where this kid's community was covered in smoke and no one came to check on them, which is absolutely ridiculous because their health is being at risk, and they have a lot of asthma attacks. Speaking of asthma attacks, 138,000 asthma attacks and 101 lost school days. So not only are all these people, our kids' education being taken away, but their health is being at risk. And we have 1 million African Americans that live within half a mile of existing natural gas facilities, which means that's 500,000 people whose health is at risk. CST1, human dignity is violated definitely when refineries are not compliant with the Clean Air Act, which is meant to protect the environment, and therefore people don't have a choice if they live nearby. So if you can't afford to live anywhere else, and that's the only place you can live, and oil refineries are targeting their place of business there because they want to target communities with low funding and not as much a political impact, so they can just write a check and get an influence. That's not having human dignity. That's just not looking at these people as a full human and have the dignity for you to conduct business properly. And when a town gets covered in smoke and no one comes to check on them, and it's an all Black lower income community, their dignity is at risk, because it just shows that no one cares about them. CST3, specific human rights are violated when these people are faced with the pressure double bind, because it can be more expensive to live in other areas. But if you live in other areas, you could take another job loan, or you could live in a poorer area and risk your health being put at risk. So people are put in a very bad oppressive double bind. And their human rights are being violated because no one's coming to check on them, and their basic rights are not being upheld. This is an example of how close oil refineries can be to neighborhoods. Social analysis. So we see that off to the left, we have about more than 1 million people, African American peoples, who are within a half-mile radius of oil refineries, which is very bad because that's 500,000 Black people who are, at threat of being unhealthy. So you see, the ecological justice is a twofold, actually, really. First, pollution is absolutely destroying our environment with the amount of greenhouse gases that are being released into our atmosphere daily. But because carbon gases absorb heat and radiate heat, global warming is coming, and it has a big drastic impact on our environment now. In addition, temperature change with ice melting, not only the temperatures of the oceans getting warmer, but also sea level rise is affecting communities all over the world. In addition to harming the environment, because companies are not following the protocol or standards, or the standards are not keeping up with the impacts of the pollution it's having on society. Because a disproportion of Black Americans live in fence-line neighborhoods, they're suffering from brunt of toxic chemicals, gases, and pollutions that are released into the industry factories into the atmosphere. One theory is that this is happening is that Black people are underrepresented in the environmental industry. As of 1990, only 1.9% of environmental workers were Black, and in 2015, only 16% were Black. It is believed that if more Black members were on the environmental review boards and the enforcement agencies, more attention would be given to the problem of pollution in these fence-line communities that impacts so many Black families. A report from the EPA's Office of Inspector General found that ECROS does not proactively conduct compliance reviews, but rather waits to receive complaint before collecting program data with funding recipients. And this is very harmful because when they get a complaint and these people who live in these areas have no representation and no money, when they're taken to court or whatever, and they have no representation, their case is usually dismissed. Which means that they are, as a result, Black communities continue to suffer, people become ill, ocean life is damaged, and global warming continues to happen. Furthermore, environmental social justice is perpetrated due to the long-standing systemic environmental racism. For example, in 1990s, redlining and social segregation created communities of Black people who were lower wage earners. When companies decided communities of Black people decided to build factories, they chose properties which were less expensive to build on. When they did this, residential property values were reduced, which meant poor people could afford to live in these areas. When mortgage companies downgraded these areas, often would not provide loans to the people who live in these areas. The result is that these areas created entrenched segregation and devastated and decay, which meant that Black people were living in undesirable areas on cheap land for prime companies to build factories. And we see that today, African Americans are 75% more likely than any other American to live in so-called fence-line communities defined as areas situated in facilities that produce hazardous waste. As a result, there's a systematic system of exposing the Black and poor communities of efforts of pollution. This environmental racism is at the core of the human rights and violation of Black Americans. The Americans have been pigeonholed into communities where they have been taken advantage by big businesses, and as a result, their health and lives have been put at risk by no fault of their own. CST 6 I saw was prevalent in my research because we see that no one was standing in solidarity when their community was up in smoke and no one came to help them. Companies targeting these individuals instead of trying to help them is not standing in solidarity. And I saw that if you do stand in solidarity, that they're by helping them pass these laws to get change, then we will see. And I think that's a very ethical response. All right, CST number 4. So given that it focuses on the power relationships must be evaluated by their efforts on those who lack minimum necessities of nutrition, housing, education, and healthcare. I saw that is CST number 4 is not upheld at all because we see companies taking advantage of poor communities, which end up resulting in a lot of pollution and 138,000 asthma attacks and 101,000 law school days each year. So not only are health being put at risk, but you're losing health and education. If we were just to give preferential option for the poor and vulnerable to get an education and have fresh air, then our problem would be solved. Call to action: reinvigorate the Environmental Protection Agency Enforcement and Compliance Assurance Program of the Clean Air Act. The honor policy of self-reporting was enacted in 2020. However, it is critical to have more oversight as pollution is out of control, which is causing harm to families in Black communities. By ensuring clean air for all people, the dignity and rights of the people in this circumstance will be met, given that they will have clean air. This will show that our community is standing in solidarity with one another because they are making sure everyone in society is healthy. The Clean Air Act makes sure that all people who are poor and vulnerable get the access to clean air regardless of your skin color. I've seen firsthand the SHP that standing in solidarity can have a huge impact on society as a whole. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this presentation.